Thank you, Navni. So just taking off from one critical aspect of the discussion that Navni pointed out, which is there's a lot of quality information available online. So we'll try to navigate that maze of information that is available in abundance for all of us, and how we can effectively distill that information and use it for our purposes, right? So I'll share my screen now and begin. Right. First thing I want you guys to do, once this goes on full screen mode, yes, it has. All right. First thing I want you guys to do is answer this question in the chat box quickly. You see listed here around 9 sources. In your opinion, select all the sources from this list that you would consider as quality sources, right? And you can quickly respond to that in the chat box. Okay, waiting for responses. Quickly, guys, this I thought would be a relatively easier sort of an activity to begin with. Pavit believes all of them can be considered as quality sources depending on the kind of information we need. Vasu believes a website from a large organization, book published by the University of Chicago Press. A lot of you seem to believe a newspaper such as the Daily Mirror is a quality source. That's interesting. We'll come back to that thought in a bit. Some of you have mentioned the podcast by The Economist. Adi is the only one who has mentioned popular magazines such as Vogue as a quality source. So there's an interesting mix here from the point of view of what each of you considers quality source as far as.
So, but I do have a question.
Yes, please go ahead.
So, but then wouldn't the context come into play? So, for example, it really depends on what we're going to be talking about that affects the quality. So,
couldn't agree more. And that's where a ceteris paribus comes in, everything else remaining the same. If you were to look for a similar kind of content and you had these options available, where would you look? You know, in that kind of a scenario.
Yeah.
If it's very specifically fashion, for instance,
then Vogue makes the best sense.
But that's the thing, that's a caveat. You might think that Vogue makes a lot of sense in the first instance.
But however, you might find something else that has no relevant information.
Exactly. From a point of view of an academic application of ideas and so on, Vogue might give you a very industry perspective, right? And if you want a more nuanced academic perspective, you might want to look elsewhere, such as The Economist or New York Times or Guardian and so on, right? So that's where this conversation is going to go, and which is why, thank you for your responses, guys. The healthy mix of what you consider quality resources and sources online is a very useful starting point for the conversation, which takes me to the large perspective that some of you had problems with in our first interaction. Some of you loathed the idea of reading. So this is a plug for the concept of reading, the first half of the whole discussion. The reason why I want to highlight the role of reading here for all of you is because all of us have this mental block against reading because we feel there are so many other diverse media and mediums through which one can consume information today. You know, Navni referred to if you have found or narrowed down on a nice Instagram account, that becomes your source of go-to information by default, or you know, at least your scroll time is spent on that activity. But we have to realize one thing, and that is the maturity with which these sources are becoming credible, right? Now you have to understand the way medium or media works is it takes a while for a particular kind of platform to begin to become credible as a source of information. And it will take a while before your podcasts, before your vlogs begin to have that kind of academic recognition and credibility. right? So for this interim, which is, 2020s and so on, we'll have to tread this fine line of collecting and distilling information very, very carefully. The beauty of reading is that when you do read, you might have noticed that as opposed to other mediums, such as, maybe a moving picture, could be a TV, could be a TV show, could be a film or a music video or a vlog. The moving pictures by design are meant to be a distraction. That's how moving pictures work as a concept, right? It's an impressionistic medium. It tries to make a quick impression on you and move on, tries to, engage in effects such as recency and sleeper, some things for you to look up later. But what this takes you away from, mediums apart from reading, what they do is they take you away from following a sequential logic to pursuing an argument. The other advantage of reading is typically the produced material involves multiple academics and researchers who rarely agree on a topic. So when you read a piece of writing that is formally accredited or academically respected, you almost sign up to broaden your understanding of the topic as well. This is highly unlikely in the space and the medium that a podcast or a vlog can provide at this point in time. In a couple of years, 3-4 years, as more and more churning happens with information, as more of us, as Navni said, generate content, the world will reach a point where these diverse media also begin to acquire that kind of academic credibility. But we are at this interesting limbo, as it were, in information processing in 2020, which is why it's very useful to understand the virtues of reading. But the question that automatically follows, and what the discussion is really about, is to help you with reading what and where, right? If you leave this discussion today with a clearer sense of this is what I want to look up, the kind of information I'm seeking, and therefore this is where I should go to look for that information, as long as that objective is relatively well met, I'm happy with the objective of this discussion, right? So let's see some of the options available of reading what and where. The first, almost after this conversation, it should become a part of your DNA as well when you try to look for information or try to write up a paper: journals. Now, the advantage of journals is they are updated and scholarly information. Both of those important hygiene checks on credibility of information are ticked by journals, right? Publishing articles in journals, so the process itself guarantees credibility in some ways. It requires researchers to communicate their findings to each other, but also be critical of each other's findings. Therefore, there is a lot of filtering or distilling of information happening in the process of writing out a journal article. But if you do not have the patience, and I completely empathize with it, if you do not have the patience to read an entire journal article in its entirety, what you can do as a starting point is quickly read the abstract. There might be thought starters in the abstract. There might be cues, there might be keywords for you that might inspire you to read on in the same journal article, or explore those keywords yourself on platforms or media formats that you are more comfortable with. But if you make your starting point of exploration about a particular topic or issue the journal article, then you are in to begin with safe hands, right? It's pre-curated, it's vetted, it's academically credible, right? But the important downside to having access to journals is that journal databases are incredibly expensive, right? So your school libraries, in some schools, you might have access to some journals or some journal databases. iASPIRE students, for instance, have access to the entire University of London online library by virtue of our library having access to the DELNet, which is the NCR library network. Our students have access to both physical copies of journals as well as virtual copies online, right? So academic libraries come in handy. Either the institution you're affiliated with at a school or undergraduate level, or you'll have to break down these paywalls that exist that give you access to these journal databases, right? Now, the important thing to keep in mind is, I understand that there will be constraints such as patience, such as the perceived need to even read the journal article, but that's where a slight workaround in the form of the abstract hack can come in handy, right? So that's one source of information that is extremely valuable and can set you off on your own journeys of exploration, right? Another popular medium or source of information are obviously newspapers. But here we have to make a distinction between the kinds of newspapers that typically tend to be valued, right? Now, broadly, newspapers of a daily or weekly formats can be divided into two types, tabloids or broadsheets. The term tabloid is also interesting because when these newspapers such as the Sun, the Mirror, the Daily Mail, and so on, these were first launched in late 19th century, the medicinal format of the tablet, the square tablet that we often consume, when these people came up with their square shaped newspapers, it reminded them of what the tablet looked like. So the name that they therefore came up with, this format of newspapers of mass consumption, popular consumption, was tabloids. So when you have a concept like tabloid journalism, look at what I've highlighted for you. Typically associated with less complex language, far more celebrity news, and largely serve an entertainment function, right? So if you therefore think back to our first slide, newspapers such as the Daily Mail or the Daily Mirror or the Sun are not the most credible source of information in the first instance. Another alternative format, the broadsheet, and it's self-explanatory why it's called the broadsheet. It's much bigger visually and structurally than the tabloid. We have some excellent examples there: the Guardian, the Telegraph, New York Times. These broadsheet newspapers, they come with instant credibility. It comes from years of a certain kind of journalism practice that uses all of these opposites to what tabloids use: complex language, more in-depth news stories, greater coverage of international affairs, and therefore they become your regular dosage and source of high quality information. So if you are in the habit of reading newspapers, you have to quickly check for yourself whether what you're reading is a tabloid newspaper, whether what you're reading is a broadsheet. And at the end of this presentation, I'll give you a list of recommended sources almost to make that choice much easier for you, right? Also notice I haven't mentioned any Indian newspapers on this list, right? Probably comes from a place of bias of how Indian journalism works, but it is what it is, right? And an obvious source of information for most of us, all of us, would be websites. That's where popular information tends to be harbored, right? But all of us are equally very keenly aware of fake news and misinformation, right? Both of those are realities of our times. They're pervasive, they are available, and they're highly prominent on social media. And what makes news fake, what makes news misinformed, is the kind of biases that you begin to figure out as a reader. The moment you figure out the biases, you understand that this is propaganda or this is misinformation or fake news, right? So you have to be very careful about how you go about your business of searching something online. And here I'd like to illustrate that very quickly for you. The third bullet point is what I want to just focus on quickly. So if you are given the mandate of coming up with a research paper or a response to a topic that you've been given in class in school or college, your first impulse might be to do a Google search. But if you curb that instinct ever so slightly, on Google, if you add Google Scholar to your search and then go to Google Scholar, I want to illustrate this difference in searches with this set of keywords. Now, as some of you might remember, I shared 3 links with you on Friday, all of which concerned Supreme's drop sales and high branding, right? Now, the set of links that I had shared with you came from a conventional search on Google. If you scroll down on the first page, you might come across some of the articles I mentioned, maybe 2, The Wired article might not show up in the first instance. But if you go here on Google Scholar and carry out the same search, your third hit is an article from 2019. I was talking about updated scholarly information. So let's see if this one is available. It is available. It's a 5-page article that talks of precisely what all of those articles were trying to get at. But this article does it by looking at multiple brands, right? So this is your abstract right here, which if it piques your interest, you might choose to pursue down the line of reading this 5-page article. Or if you are sufficiently motivated, you might now go back to your conventional Google search and look for the keywords that came up in your Google Scholar search. The advantage of Google Scholar is it attempts to search through academic sites and pages only. And with that automatic filter, what your information becomes is more credible, more reliable, right? So that's a very important virtue to cultivate. Speaking of fake news, this is an interesting example that I found. So ABC News is the news division of ABC, right? And this is their website. So let's go to the ABC News website quickly. Okay, so this is abcnews.go.com. This is their website, and it's a website of a news agency. So there is some amount of credibility already coming in from their reputation and so on. But equally, and this is where you need to be particularly careful when you're sifting information online, there is this other website, which is a spoof website called abcnews.com.co, right? So all that has changed between the two domains is the com location in the title of the website. But content-wise, check out what the spoof website offers you. So when I typed abcnews.com.go, it changed to keyc.tv. That's your first telltale sign. If the domain changes on top, it means that you are not in healthy information ground. And check out the sources and check out the credits. They're all by admin, or in some cases by a professor without mentioning who it is by. No names are credited. These are telltale signs for what qualifies as misinformation and what is credible, right? So you have to be very careful when you navigate what otherwise seems like an invaluable mine of information, the internet. You have to be extremely careful. Some of you might have gotten slightly complacent. You might have had a similar conversation in school before your research paper submissions and so on. But this is the time to, re-jolt yourself into thinking more sensibly when navigating information online, right? On first glance, you can see why some people might be fooled into thinking that the spoof website is indeed genuine. If you are looking closely, if you are being vigilant as someone who is looking for information, these anomalies will begin to rise up in your face unmissably, right? So given that this is the kind of problem or the kind of challenges we are living with as far as accessing and using or relying on information is concerned, what is the way forward really, right? So the first way forward is to move away from your reliance on opinions to arguments. So anyone here quickly wants to tell us what they understand by the difference between an argument and an opinion? Are they the same? Are they synonyms, arguments and opinions? Okay, I see a response coming in. So Pavit, can you clarify what is objective and what is subjective?
So subjective basically means that it differs from person to person.
Right.
Right. So if a person has an opinion, the only factor of me formulating that opinion won't only be the plain black and white information regarding that issue, It will also be a lot of other factors as well, such as how I feel about it, how my community feels about it, and
Okay.
etc. etc.
Okay.
Whereas objectivity relates to only that information that is there. All right, whether it is good or bad, that is not what an argument goes for. It only goes for what is presented in the information that is given to us.
So then you are saying that arguments equal facts in a manner of speaking.
Up to a certain extent. I mean, of course, arguments have to have a certain sense of whether they're right or wrong. But comparatively, I think arguments are more fact-based than opinions.
Right. So the only tweak I'd like to make to what Pavit said, Pavit is mostly accurate. The only place where I'd like to make a tweak is not so much facts, but think of it as evidence. Right? The evidence could be behavior. The evidence could still be something that is a trend, but it is still backed up with evidence that has been accepted as credible, which might not be the same as facts, right? So if you begin to think of two ways of articulating your thoughts, the easier means of doing that would be to say that this is an opinion that I have on this issue, right? It doesn't have the compulsion of you having to back up your opinion with evidence. But the moment you have strong reasons, which therefore need the backing of evidence, you are moving towards a pole of trying to make an argument, right? A couple of more responses are coming in. Give me a second. Okay, Shreyas believes arguments involve landing at judgments, while opinion is just a point of view without. That's pretty much, accurate, Shreyas, with the addition of evidence. Absolutely, the evidence bit is the critical bit. So my strong suggestion to you would be, when you do read content this day onwards, right? The slight rewiring you have to do in your brain is think about the issues that are raised in the text. Don't be a passive reader. Try to be an active reader when you're reading a piece of content. Try to be alert. Get your cup of coffee before. Archive, cordon off half an hour or an hour for your reading. That could involve listening to a podcast and making your own notes as well, guys. The example that I shared of a podcast from The Economist is one of the best podcasts available in the world, The Economist podcast, right? It's fantastic. It summarizes the week for you and it gives you excellent insights and thought starters, right? So if you're traveling, etc., you're falling short of time to manage your reading, a podcast and simultaneous notes is extremely useful as long as the podcast is from a credible organization. The advantage of a podcast, the advantage of reading is you can pause. You can check if you agree or disagree with the author's viewpoint. Are you sufficiently convinced with the amount of evidence, bullet point number 3, the amount of evidence that has been cited? Are the reasons that are backing up the author's claims opinions or arguments? Right? You must therefore understand that it is a challenge to form an argument. It is very easy, on the contrary, to form an opinion, especially when everyone has one. Every person on social media has an opinion on issues. But if you put a gun to their head and tell them, engage in a debate with me on this issue and provide evidence that back up your claim, you will know that they will not have much to back up their opinions with. And you do not want to be that person. You want to be the kind of person who has this arsenal almost of arguments backed up with evidence that give credence and reliability to what you are saying, which will only increase your status as either an influencer or someone who should be heard or someone who should be taken seriously or someone should be read. So whatever you do by way of distilling information online and reading, you must consistently at all times think of formulating arguments out of those. Is there a pro? Is there a con? Can you look at an issue and break it down simply into its advantages, disadvantages, pros and cons, and then reach a synthesis at the end? That is the value of forming an argument. With an opinion, you'll be more than happy to be sold on the pros or the cons, right? So that's one strong way forward I would like to keep with you. The second one I felt that is extremely valuable, related point, is cultivate a systematic notes habit. Navni ma'am and Sahil sir last week took you guys through how you can use docs meaningfully, how you can use all these resources that allow you to store an incredible amount of data usefully. So what I'm suggesting here is, if you begin to break down your drive suite into certain kinds of docs that deal with topics of a particular kind that interest you. Some of you might be, you expressed your interest in the world of sports and management. Some of you are interested keenly in the world of sports, and yet you are here in a career workshop in economics, management, and finance. So there has to be a sweet spot somewhere, right? There has to be a point where your interests converge. And that is where you need to start exploring what are your options with respect to becoming someone of authority in that domain, right? Now, in that pursuit, if you're not organized in the first instance, you will find yourself in this chaos of misinformation, this almost anarchic bobble of everyone saying their opinions aloud and so on. You want a systematic journey that takes you to a point where you now have a set of arguments, a set of clearly articulated thoughts about your chosen interest areas. Maintaining an online diary has become ever more useful. Evernote is one example, Google Keep is another. Use Google Docs wisely. Try to label your docs accurately, but very important, and this, you'll thank me for this if we meet next year at iASPIRE or sometime in the future. Ensure you are archiving your notes from whatever you're consuming, whatever content you're consuming, in a chronological order. If you do the things we discussed on the previous slide, which is thinking while you are reading, which is assessing the weight of the argument while you are reading it, the pros and cons, what will typically happen, and you will notice this happening increasingly as you go down this process, is your subsequent notes about the same topic will become progressively more mature, more nuanced, and ready to be taken into the world outside, either as a vlog that you write, where you have assimilated enough written or audible content through a podcast on that issue, and you've assimilated them in an argument that is uniquely yours. You will reach a point, say on the 4th or 5th page of your doc for some of you, or the 100th page for some of you, where you are beginning to formulate your unique ways of addressing, understanding, and perhaps resolving if it's an issue that you want to resolve, right? The doc will be testament to this maturity as far as distilling and using information is concerned, right? So I strongly encourage each one of you to begin this pursuit, right? You don't have to have a physical diary at all in this day and age, but it's very, very easy to do this chronologically. And that little effort of ensuring the chronological sequence will go a long way towards almost assuring yourself that you are doing something right, right? That's all I really had to discuss by way of thoughts being shared. This is something I want to leave you guys with. It's a recommended list of online sources you can explore and make use of. Now, the reason this list is only one slide long, you might ask, why aren't there more sources listed here, right? Think of it as what a credit rating agency does from yesterday's discussion. Think of this as almost a vetted list of sources that will keep you in relatively safe hands when it comes to information. And this is my take on what a recommended list of online sources for someone who is interested in economics, management, and finance should be reading. This is just my take, right? And if you look at the classification, I've broken it down into magazines, daily newspapers, and online resources for case studies. What you can add to this list is a podcast such as the Economist podcast. You'll find that in the Economist, the first link there. All of these are resources that have that signal credibility, that use and host authors of credibility, and that therefore are not shy of announcing who it's written by, right? And that's one of your telltale signs, to begin to sift information from misinformation. So that's all that I really had to share with you guys on the very tricky aspect of how to navigate the world of information. I will now hand over the mic to Sonia, and if there are any questions, we'll take them at the end of Sonia's session. Right? Happy exploring and happy chronological docs to all of you.